Madam President, today we continue to find ourselves in an unfortunate position of a partial government shutdown. Following a veto threat from the President last night, Democrats in the House of Representatives killed 3 spending bills that would have funded parks and monuments, veterans programs, and the D.C. government. Senate Democrats have already rejected 4 House-passed proposals that would have provided Americans with relief from Obamacare while ensuring that government operations continued. Senate Democrats even rejected 1 proposal that would have sent the 2 chambers to conference, the House and the Senate to conference, to work out some sort of a solution to the standoff that we find ourselves in. But they haven't even been willing to talk. In fact, when that proposal, that request from the House came to the Senate to create a conference that would allow the House and the Senate to come together and try and find a solution, it was tabled. It was soundly rejected, tabled by the Democrats here in the United States Senate. And so we're continuing in this holding pattern as the House continues to send proposals over and they continue to be rejected by the Senate, but then the Senate Democrats don't want to even sit down and talk with the House about how we might resolve this. Now, I'm happy to hear that the President has, after a week of essentially ignoring congressional Republicans, called the leaders to the White House tonight. I'm a little confused, however, about the purpose of the meeting as the White House continues to say that they're not going to negotiate. I hope the President does change his mind on that, that he's evolving on this, and that he'll express a willingness to work with Republicans at this meeting. Because it really is important for the President to be engaged in this process. So you can't imagine a scenario where you've got consequences like this with a continuing resolution, a funding resolution, still not approved, partial government shutdown, debt limit coming up here at the middle of the month, and the President of the United States essentially saying, I'm not going to negotiate. I'm just not going to negotiate on any of this. I think that is a position that's completely unreasonable, and I think the American people find it to be completely unreasonable as well. In the meantime, we have an opportunity now to address some of the concerns that have been raised by people about various parts of our government that, as a result of this unnecessary shutdown, are not open. And so Republicans continue to try and work to open government and at the same time to provide Obamacare fairness for all. And, you know, I've said this before, Madam President, but I get the sense that some of our colleagues on the Democrat side, the President, seem to be content with shutting down the government. Well, we Republicans are not. We are consistently trying to come up with solutions. And again, the House of Representatives will be meeting today, and they're going to be voting again on some of the same proposals that were voted down last night by House Democrats that are common sense spending bills that would ensure that important functions of government can resume. These bills would ensure that benefits for our nation's veterans continue uninterrupted. They would allow our members of the National Guard and Reserve to be paid, provide funding for the National Institutes of Health to ensure that this senseless shutdown does not prevent patients from receiving life-saving treatments. And I'm just going to explain very briefly, Madam President, what some of these bills would do. And they're going to be coming over later today from the House of Representatives to the Senate, where, at least to date, none of the proposals that have been advanced by the House of Representatives have been accepted here in the Senate. They've been tabled by the Majority Leader, and which is unfortunate, because it's the essence of, I think, what the American people believe we ought to be doing, and that is working together, coming together to find a solution to some of these big problems. Unfortunately, as I said before, when the request came over to go to conference with the House, that was tabled as well. So there's been no discussion, no willingness to talk, no willingness to try and cooperate in a way that would help us get government, fundamental operations of government up and running again. But anyway, the bills are going to come over from the House today, follow the same, as I said, track that they tried to get approved last night. One deals with the availability through the annual appropriations process for the Department of Veterans Affairs to continue to serve veterans, namely veterans disability payments, the GI Bill, education training, VA home loans, all under the same conditions that were in effect at the end of the just completed fiscal year. So in other words, it would take all those programs that benefit veterans, make sure that they continue uninterrupted, funded just as they were at the end of the fiscal year until such time as Congress can come up with a longer-term solution. whether that's an appropriation bill, which frankly should have been passed much earlier this year and wasn't, because none of the appropriation bills actually were moved here in the United States Senate, or another temporary funding measure like a continuing resolution is put forward. But there are, that is a proposal that, similar proposal I should say, was introduced by a number of Senate Democrats. So when it comes over from the House of Representatives today, I hope that we will have broad bipartisan support in the United States Senate for making sure that veterans programs are continued and are funded. There's also going to be a bill that comes over that deals with national parks and museums, and it would provide immediate funding for the National Park Service operations, the Smithsonian, the National Gallery of Art, and the United States Holocaust Museum at the same rate and under the same conditions as in effect at the end of the just completed fiscal year. So essentially, same thing I mentioned with regard to veterans programs, these functions of government would be funded at the same level as they were at the year we just completed until such time, again, as an appropriations bill is passed or a temporary funding measure is put in place. And so that was something that the House voted on yesterday. It was defeated. Again, House Democrats, I shouldn't say it was universally, but almost so, voted against that measure when it was brought up yesterday. Hopefully today they'll get a different outcome in the House. I think they will, and it will come over here to the Senate. Another bill that the House will move today will provide for the immediate availability of local funds, which are subject to the control of Congress through the annual appropriations process for the District of Columbia, again, under the same conditions as in effect at the end of the just completed fiscal year. And then finally, there will be a bill that comes over from the House, provides funding for the pay and allowances of military personnel on the reserve component who are in inactive status. So it'll fund the Guard and Reserve. Those funds, again, would be made available at the same level as the just completed fiscal year and until such time as Congress takes more formal action. And then finally, the other thing that it will do, there will be another bill coming from the House, a fifth bill, that will provide immediate funding for the National Institutes of Health at the same rate and under the same conditions as in effect at the end of the just completed fiscal year. So the important work that's done by the National Institutes of Health will continue, if the bill is enacted here by the Senate, to go on even in the midst of a partial shutdown. I guess what I'm saying, Madam President, is Republicans are trying to address all of these concerns that we have about various elements of our government that are not functioning today because of this partial shutdown. And last night were met with resistance in the House of Representatives. Those were voted down by Democrats. We are hoping for a different outcome today. I think we will have a different outcome today in the House of Representatives, at which point those bills will come here to the Senate. So if the Senate is interested in going on the record and making sure that there is funding available for veterans programs, for the museums and for our monuments and that sort of thing, for our Guard and Reserve, for the National Institutes of Health, and for the District of Columbia, which is under the jurisdiction of the Congress when it comes to funding, the Senate should vote affirmatively and actually ensure that, that those important functions of our government are addressed and are funded. And so, Madam President, I guess what I'm simply saying here today is that time and time again now, the House of Representatives has sent to the Senate legislation, measures that would continue to fund the government, and in earlier cases, as they came over here, address what I think the American people have said they want to see addressed in Obamacare. And, you know, we've talked a lot about this, but the President of the United States has granted a delay, a one-year delay to employers in this country from the employer mandate. So essentially, he gave a delay, a waiver, if you will, to big business. What the House of Representatives in one of the bills that they sent the Senate simply said was, we ought to, in fairness, give the same break to individuals. There is an individual mandate in the Obamacare law that kicks in, and that we ought to be able to give individuals in this country the same treatment that we give to big businesses. And so as a matter of fairness, that was proposed by the House of Representatives, and when that bill came over, it also included a provision that would ensure that members of Congress and their staffs and the staffs of the President's office and the executive branch of the government are all subject to the same laws, same provisions, the laws applied in the same way, the Obamacare law, as are other Americans. And so you had a one-year delay, temporary relief from the individual mandate included in that, and a provision that ensured that those of us up here and our staffs and members of the executive branch are treated the same way as are other Americans. That too was tabled here in the United States Senate. And it strikes me at least that as we think about the impact of this law, we ought to ensure that middle-class Americans deserve the same relief that the President and that Democrats here in the Senate have already given to members of Congress and to their staffs, as well as to big businesses in this country. Now, we had an opportunity to do that the other night. That was rejected by the Senate, and I think that the question that every American ought to be asking is why would you not, here in the United States Senate, why won't Democrat senators give the same break to the American people that big businesses have received? And I would argue again, Madam President, it's an issue of basic fairness. We think it ought to be delayed for all Americans, not just for the favored few. Now, there is bipartisan support for this. I've mentioned before that we have a Democrat senator here in the United States Senate who has said that a delay in the individual mandate is a very reasonable and sensible approach. I would hope that at some point that view will start to spread to others and we'll be able to actually provide some relief to the American people from the harmful effects of Obamacare. But at least while we're in this period, as this continues to be discussed and hopefully eventually a solution reached, we ought to be protecting those Americans who are being hit by the shutdown. And so when these bills come over from the House of Representatives today, I hope that the Senate will pick them up very quickly and act on them. We had an example or an incident yesterday where a number of World War II veterans came here to Washington, D.C., honor flight guests. So that's an organization that brings veterans here, World War II veterans, here to see their monument, the World War II monument here, a memorial here in Washington, and couldn't get access to it because of the shutdown. That should be unacceptable to every American. And we need to ensure that that never happens again. There was even reporting, Madam President, that they had made a request of the administration to be able to go there and that they were turned down. Now, I can't imagine turning down a group of World War II veterans who simply wanted to see and have access to the very memorial for which they fought and defended our country. And so those are the types of things that action taken by the Senate here could prevent if in fact, when these bills come over from the House of Representatives, the Senate will act in an expeditious way, pick those bills up and pass them. We can ensure that people have access to those types of, to the monuments, the memorials. We can ensure that veterans programs continue to be funded and operational. We can ensure that the National Institutes of Health and the important work that it does continues. We can ensure that our National Guard and Reserve also are funded through this time. And it strikes me, at least, as that's a very common sense way to approach the situation in which we find ourselves today. I would hope that at the end of the day that we can come to some resolution that would allow the government to be funded on a more sustainable basis. I think when we continue to do these things on a short-term basis, it's not a good way to govern a country as large as ours. We can do better. The American people deserve better. But we at least, at a minimum, until we get that broader issue resolved, we ought to resolve that we're going to ensure that veterans and members of the Guard and Reserve, people who are visiting our country, want to see the memorials, the museums, and that sort of thing, have the opportunity to do that. We can do that today by picking up and passing the bills when they come over from the House of Representatives. Madam President, I yield the floor.